Hello. Today I'm going to move on to Price's Chapter 8, The Domains of Abstract Thought. So this is from her book, Medieval Thought. So thought itself. There was increasing intellectualization of Christianity during the Middle Ages. Thinking was valued. The actual process of thinking was seen as the most important human capacity. To think was part of fulfilling one's place as a human being in the hierarchy of creation. In this sense, the medieval conception of human rationality in God's creation harmonized with the classical valuing of thought by the Greeks and Romans. At the same time, however, medieval thought also expressed the central role of Christian beliefs and institutions in the development and exercise of human intellectuality. And Price gives a list of 9 councils and doctrines to do with things such as the supremacy of the Bishop of Rome, the debate on orthodoxy of various beliefs, the weighing of arguments for various religious practices, various concerns about authority, the role of church authority vis-a-vis secular power, talking about heresy and affirming papal strength, censuring institutions of learning, and analyzing the church's institutional weaknesses. So if you want to look at those, you can see the book. Then again, medieval thinkers reflected their theological presuppositions, of course, unlike classical thinkers, and these included the idea that the body of thought is dominated by ideas of the supernatural, religious assumptions about God are deemed to be truths which can't be contradicted by other ideas. The ideas themselves take the existence of theology into account. The ideas of theology become the object of inquiry in another body of thought. The ideas make appeal to theology. 2 final general points. Although historical, political, and social factors gave the church a strong intellectual role, with medieval clerics serving as preservers, educators, synthesizers, translators, and exegetes of the written word, the church itself didn't orchestrate thought monopolistically. Secondly, medieval Christian thought was highly abstract. There was a conception of religious absolutes, like truth, being, good, and so on, and an emphasis on abstract immaterial attributes of being and of God. The classification of knowledge elevated the most abstract concepts and entities and the most abstract disciplines of metaphysics and theology. A lot of medieval discussion about thinking would be nowadays what we would think of as psychology. The word psychology itself was coined in as late as the 16th century, but comes from the classical Greek study of the psyche or soul, and the soul was considered to be the organ of thought, amongst other things, and a central medieval point of discussion of the soul was the study of its faculties or powers, so essentially a psychological element here. The distinctiveness of humans compared to animals and plants was the capacity for reasoning, so that from Augustine onwards was a sustained interest in human rationality. The brain was seen as that organ of the soul which bestowed the capacity of reasoning, so that the individual could understand both external and internal sensations. Influenced both by Aristotle and Ibn Rushd, termed by the Latins as Averroes, scholars saw reasoning as remaining predominantly dependent on the information of the external senses, sight, smell, hearing, touch, and taste. These stimulated brain activity. The brain's perceptions were completed by its internal senses, including the common sense, imagination, and memory. There was disagreement as to the process of perception and the role of the intellect in facilitating rational thought. Thus, for Albertus Magnus, the intellectual soul was separate from the body and could proceed beyond sense perception to contemplate itself and ultimately God. But for Aquinas, the soul was inseparable from the body and didn't contain an intellect which could directly understand itself. These discussions indicate how central ideas about cognition and rationality were during this period. As to divisions of thought, medieval classifications of knowledge were broadly based on Aristotle and became more complex as more of Aristotle's texts became available. Thus, the arts comprised gymnastics, grammar, music, logic, rhetoric, and poetry, the practical sciences, moral philosophy and ethics, the speculative sciences, natural philosophy, mathematics, and metaphysics, including physics. There was a fundamental rethinking of the role of Aristotle in Christian thought in the late 13th century. By the middle of the 13th century, it was widely agreed that Aristotle's works could be used as basic texts for teaching university courses, but some scholars considered the works of Aristotle as a pagan to be dangerous to Christian belief. This was expressed by Etienne Tampier, Bishop of Paris, who issued his condemnations in 1277, containing 219, or listing 219 contemporary teachings and describing them as vanities and lying follies. This led many to reconsider Aristotle's work, a process which continued to have an impact well into the Renaissance. Thus, whilst the Avarists, those who supported Ibn Rushd's interpretation of Aristotle, remained staunchly in support, others, with varying opinions, held that only Scripture was true. One result was the emergence, as we've seen already, of the Via Moderna, which questioned Aristotle, in contrast to the Via Antiqua, which dominated the 13th century. Some rejected Aristotle altogether, as well as any ideas which appeared to contradict theology, or even omitted any reference to him at all. They also preferred treatises rather than commentaries on Aristotle. For their part, the Avarists thought that their opponents had abandoned reason. In any case, the original Aristotelian classification scheme was being severed from the corpus of his works. So thank you very much for listening, and again, particular thanks to my patrons for their support and encouragement.